embrace CD, and as such, they will look for a CI front end that is more closely aligned, or at least loosely coupled to the CD platform in a way that gives people the flexibility they require. And it's an interesting argument. On the converse side, a lot of the providers of existing CI/CD platforms would argue that, well, organizations are continuing to build monolithic applications, so they need to be able to build and deploy monoliths alongside microservices-based applications, so they're not going to throw out what they currently have in place. And many of them are already using those platforms to build cloud-native applications that get deployed on Kubernetes clusters. So there may not be as compelling a need to rip and replace. That said, CloudBees has a proprietary offering that they are positioning as a modern DevOps platform. And that is interesting in the sense that they are moving away from that open source model that made Jenkins go. Mm-hmm. We also have Harness, which has embraced open source. And then there's this Argo CD platform that Intuit built that is being advanced under the CNCF, that is gaining traction in cloud native environments. And one of the reasons that Octopus Deploy bought CodeFresh is they have a lot of expertise working with Argo. And in fact, there's an interview over on Techstrong TV with Jeremy Unruh from Credit Karma, talking about how they are using Argo and why they're using it. Of course, Credit Karma is a subsidiary of Intuit, so you might have to come up with a heck of a good reason not to use it. But the point being is that there's a transition happening here, and DevOps teams are starting to choose up sides, and it's not clear to me how they're going to navigate this. And in CloudBees' case, they are saying that the existing Jenkins platform can be extended to be integrated with the new platform. So there is a transition path there. Other folks, though, might be looking at ripping and replacing things. And of course, some organizations have multiple CI/CD platforms as it is by different teams. And they're having discussions right now about whether or not to standardize on one platform in this age of so-called platform engineering, which throws another thorny issue into the whole discussion. But it seems to me, at least, that we haven't had this level of uncertainty about where to go forward in terms of our CI/CD platforms than I've seen in recent memory.
Right. And what's also interesting to me is that at the same time, and maybe this isn't an issue, but at the same time that organizations are really starting to focus on controlling costs across the board, not just cloud costs, but everywhere, the fact that, you might need to rip and replace what you have, that seems like it might be an argument not in favor of ripping and replacing, right? Like, you may as well just stick with what you have. It seems like it'd be a lot more expensive to have to transition. But then also, my other question would be about just consolidation in general. Do you think there's going to be a larger wave of these kind of acquisitions coming? A lot of startups and venture-backed organizations have not been able to get the kind of funding that they had even a year ago. So how does that tie into it? It's a thorny issue indeed.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very serious issue, and it's particularly problematic in this cloud native space because a lot of the companies are startups and they were depending on getting their next round of funding. But that funding is harder to come by when interest rates are so high and investors are basically beating up on venture capitalists and saying, why should I give you money to get a 5% return when the bank is guaranteeing me a 4 to 5% return? And that's safer. So that's kind of where the core of the cash crunch is at. That may change as interest rates gradually come down, but we'll see how that plays out. In the meantime, some companies are just running out of money and funding, and in the absence of that funding, they got to look to be acquired, and venture capitalists are trying to cash out and see what they can get for some organizations, and sometimes they may decide to grin and bear it and hold out for the long term. But other times they're going to be like, nope, we got to go. We're going to flip this proverbial hamburger now and move on to the next thing. And there's a lot of next things out there for them to invest in, right? It's not just client server. They've got AI funds and all kinds of things that are perhaps a little more compelling at the moment. So for IT teams, it creates a little bit of a quandary because you're not sure who's going to be where once you buy something, and that level of uncertainty tends to make people cautious.
Yes, indeed it does. So we were talking about Argo and your conversation with Jeremy Unruh from Credit Karma. And it was interesting to hear him talk about the CD issue, the CI/CD issue, and how they made the decision to go the Argo route. And Argo seems to be everywhere. This really seems to be becoming a standard for cloud native CI/CD here. Is that what you're seeing as well?
I think there's a whole set of folks who are embracing DevOps principles for cloud native in greenfield environments, right? They get a Kubernetes environments going and it has very little to do with their legacy environment. And they're the ones that are driving adoption, especially of Argo. There are some organizations like Intuit that have, made a switch to Kubernetes whole hog. And, they're at the front end of Argo, clearly. So it's not clear to me how many organizations made that commitment, but most of those greenfield environments for Kubernetes, of which there are an increasingly larger number because there's more startup companies than ever that are building applications that are native to Kubernetes, and they don't have any legacy platforms to worry about. And so they look around and Argo pops up pretty quickly.
It does. It does. So to kind of further that a little bit and segue into our next topic, the number of Kubernetes clusters that are running now in production just keeps growing and growing and growing exponentially. And we had a great article this week about a Cast AI report that was talking about just the massive scale of cloud infrastructure waste that is generated from all of these clusters running. Go ahead.
It's basically an open secret that we're wasting massive amounts of cloud infrastructure. And that part, it's just human nature at the end of the day and the way we operate, right? Developers are provisioning these environments, and especially in the case of Kubernetes, as noted in this report, they'll over-provision because from their perspective, the worst thing in the world is for them to get a call at 3:00 in the morning that their application crashed. So
because they don't have the resources.
Right. And historically, that was the way you always did things back in the on-premise day. You just spec as much as you could possibly get or afford to get. Theoretically, Kubernetes is supposed to make it easier to scale up and scale down, but not a lot of people invoke those capabilities just yet. And the other side of this question, too, is there's so many clusters now, and they're so complex that the average person who's running IT isn't able to keep up with that anyway. So even if they are aware of the issue, their ability to do something about it is limited. Cast AI is making a case for using AI and machine learning algorithms to automate that process. But, there's a lot of people who are still on the front end of that curve. And I think they're right. I believe that we will use AI to bring more of that under control. It's not clear to me what that might do to the revenue implications for cloud service providers as we all get more efficient. But there's another factor here, and it's all those advocates for green IT who are basically noting that we need to find ways to generate less carbon. And if we keep running and over provisioning resources in the cloud, that's not helping. So I think there's besides the cost factor and the finance team coming around with the FinOps club, there's a whole other green IT side of this equation that hasn't been factored in. But I think the pressure to be more efficient is there, but it takes a little while to do something about it.
Right. And my other question, hypothetically, is all of that AI, using AI to right size, do you not also need back-end resources, many of which are running in the cloud, to be able to drive the AI solution to right size? Or am I not understanding? So how does that balance out? Like, are you just shifting cloud resources from one to the other?
Yeah, I mean, in the sum total of things, yeah, it's going to be more efficient. But yeah, you are spending some level of compute to make the rest of the compute efficient. But I don't think it's a huge percentage yet. We talk about AI, and there's two flavors of it, right? There's the generative AI models that a OpenAI will build that, those things are massive. But then there's AI models for predictive, and those things are not massive. They're measured in maybe terabytes. And so, they don't consume as much as a generative AI model. Not all AI models are equally piggish, if that makes any sense.
Okay. That makes sense. And, we're talking about not just over provisioning, but also over permissioning. And that came up as well in an article from KSOC, the Kubernetes Security Operations Center, talking about their addition of tools to improve Kubernetes security. And one of the big issues that they mentioned was over permissioning. So in addition to over provisioning, a lot of DevOps folks tend to just, give access to anyone who might possibly need it. And that's a big problem.
A lot of this comes back to standard security issues that we've seen that are, comes down to credentials, right? Mm-hmm. The bad guys steal the credentials, then distributing malware everywhere. And before you know it, you've got this kind of catastrophic event. In the case of Kubernetes, that is more problematic because the role-based access controls that come with Kubernetes, or shall we say, complicated and maybe cumbersome to deal with. So KSOC is making it easier to implement and maintain those controls with a policy engine that they're putting into their platform, which, and you got to give these guys props. I think they came out of nowhere in the last couple of years to really kind of take a leadership position around Kubernetes security in terms of not just their platform, but, they put out a lot of good content about, what threats to look for and those things. So I would say that they are a positive contributor to the community as a whole. So
I agree. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think Kubernetes security is going to get easier. To be honest, it's been an afterthought. You would think every time we come out with a new platform that security would not be an afterthought after all these years, but it continues to be an afterthought after all these years. And there's been a lot of progress made in the last year, but I feel, could be wrong, and this might be a conspiracy theory, but I think we did not look hard enough at the security issues when Kubernetes was being rolled out, because we already knew it was complex as it was. And if we wanted to address the security issues, we would have scared even more people off. So I think we deliberately left too much to be dealt with later by others mantra, or sometimes you hear the Kubernetes community say, well, it's a platform for other platforms to be built on. Well, that's not much comfort when you're the IT person going, what the heck am I doing with this thing again?
Right. I think it was yet another project that they figured they could just throw over the wall to the security people without realizing that fairly soon they would also need to be some of those security people.
Yeah. I mean, there is a SIG for security for the special interest group, for those who don't know what a SIG is, in the Kubernetes community. So, and they're doing a fine job, but
Absolutely.
it's trying to fix something after the fact, and it's not as always easy to do. So you got to wait for updates, but I think progress is being made. I just don't think it's coming fast enough because these Kubernetes clusters are now, after better part of half a decade, actually showing up in production environments, and the bad guys are like, "Ooh, what's this?"
Yep. Yep. Speaking of security and open source and that kind of thing, it seems the CNCF announced that it graduated Falco to improve Linux security. So that's kind of, another layer of progress on the open source tooling project. Well, not really tooling, open source security front.
I'm not entirely sure that, the notion of graduating means a lot to folks. I think it gives some level of comfort to a CIO or a senior IT leader that something has been, shall we say, vetted.
Yeah.
But people have been using Falco for a while now, including Sysdig that created it. And what's interesting to me about this, though, is the security game is changing. And for those of you who don't know what Falco is it basically enables you to apply policies in the Linux operating system that if thresholds are exceeded, you'll generate some kind of alert to tell you that there is a cybersecurity event.
Mm-hmm.
And what's important about that is it happens in real time. And the reason it happens in real time is partially because Falco was one of the first platforms to make use of this extended Berkeley packet filtering technology inside the Linux subsystem that enables security software or storage or networking software or observability software to run in a safe, isolated fashion that allows it to drive performance at a higher level of scale than could ever be achieved when that same software is running in user space. So we're going to see a lot more of this use case involving different classes of software being run out of the eBPF subsystem that Microsoft plans to use also in Windows. And I think they're making some progress along that route already. And this is going to change the way we use all this software. It's just that, Falco was one of the first to kind of take advantage of that. And I think they've been at this now for several years, so it took a while to graduate. And I guess congratulations are in order.
Yeah.
I'm hoping we'll see more usage of this because the hang up is it's only the last 3 or 4 revs of Linux that have had support for eBPF. So it's a work in progress, as they say.
Yeah. But progress, however slow, is still progress, I think.
There you go. I think the part of the issue, though, is, and you know this well, I mean, how many people are cybersecurity experts that know Kubernetes? I mean, kind of looking for the
really narrowing the funnel there.
and do you think that, that lack of expertise tends to hold back adoption of Kubernetes? Same thing we see with developers. I don't have enough developers who know how to write apps for Kubernetes. And so, as great as this platform is, it seems like, there are these things that are either overlooked or just natural hangups that are, that slow down the pace of adoption.
Right. No, I agree. And I think that's part of the push to develop these levels of abstraction that sit on top of Kubernetes to get rid of that complexity. And I think I can't think of examples off the top of my head, of course, but as we see more and more of those levels, they seem to track with the level of adoption, right? Just making it easier so you're not don't have to be down there in the guts every day, fighting for your life.
All right. I prefer to fight for my right to party, but
well, that too, but then we're aging ourselves, I guess, on that front.
I suppose so.
Yeah.
Well, that's all we got for this week, folks. I don't know if you want to add anything, Sharon. Thoughts, closing.
No, thanks for joining us as always. And we're going to put all of the links to the articles and videos and interviews that we talked about in the show notes. If you have a topic that you want us to cover, or if you want to come on the show and talk to us yourself, we would love to have you, and we want to hear from you. We'll put our contact information in there too as well. And until next week, thanks so much. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Next up on Techstrong TV, I'm really happy we have an interview with our own Mitchell Ashley, where Mitch interviews Testify Sec co-founder and CEO Cole Kennedy about the gaps in software supply chain security and how this led to the creation of Testify Sec. Also, we're going to be live in Paris later this month at KubeCon, Cloud Native Con, and Cole will be there too, as well as members of the Testify Sec team, as they're presenting at KubeCon this year in Paris. So check them out there. But for now, here's Mitchell and Cole Kennedy.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everybody, I have the great pleasure of being joined by Cole Kennedy. Cole is co-founder and CEO with Testify Sec. Welcome, Cole. Good to be chatting with you.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks for having me on the show.
You bet. We're talking right before KubeCon, so folks may see this before, also after. I'm excited to talk to you about some interesting things going on. But for folks that might not know Testify Sec, tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so we're a somewhat new company, really focused on software supply chain security and provenance. It's really about being able to prove the provenance of your artifacts, right? We collect all that metadata about those artifacts and then allow you to validate that things happen the way it's supposed to happen.
Fantastic. As a fellow entrepreneur, we always have the interesting origin story. If you don't mind sharing a little bit, like, why did you step out from whatever you were doing before and say, I've got to form this company to go do this?
Yeah, so it's a little bit different story for us. I actually spent 12 years in the military before I actually got into software engineering, more than a hobby. As I got out of the military, I still want to stay a part of that mission. So I started working for Joint Special Operations Command. And I really found that deploying software applications on some of these classified networks isn't really that easy. And I actually was deployed to Jordan to deploy one of our mission applications for the intelligence community. And this was on a different network than we normally deploy to. And so they sent me a week before Christmas. It was really, really important mission. And I get there and we don't have the right compliance package, right? I'm sure we've all run into this before where we don't have a security check or we don't have a scan that we need. So, our project gets delayed. Well, this was a little different because I was on the other side of the world. It was over Christmas and my wife and my 1-year-old daughter were at home. So this really kind of gave me the push that I needed to say, hey, how do we solve this problem? How do we deliver software in high compliance environments? So as I moved on with my career, I found out that, hey, it's not just the DoD that has this issue, right? It's critical infrastructure, FinServ, right? Anybody that has these compliance concerns, it's really important that they understand what happened in their software, and then they can communicate this to the authorizing officials or the CISO or whoever's responsible for the risk of that software.
And it's throughout, right? It's not only government and military, but in the public sector, and everybody's really trying to beef up, their security, their software, and their software supply chain. I'd love to get your perspective on kind of state of where things are. You've lived it, right? Trying to deploy in software in Jordan. Not a great place to get stuck, I assume, over the holiday with your family back here in the States. I'd love to get your perspective on kind of where are we with the adapting or adopting DevSecOps, but also more importantly, the supply chain security and kind of how we build more attestation as well, security into our supply chain.
Yeah, so I think we're doing pretty good at creating some tools that solve specific problems. But really, when we talk about DevSecOps, it's about communication. And I'm going to back up a little bit, right? Because with
Okay.
DevOps, it's all about communication, right? How do we communicate the intent that we have to deploy to these production systems in a very efficient way, right? Email, change control boards, those things were kind of inefficient. So we developed APIs, right? Like Kubernetes, Ansible, Terraform. And we've seen the realization of those APIs and those technologies over the past 5, 10 years has really accelerated the pace on which we can deliver software. So when we think about DevSecOps, right, how are we changing that communication paradigm? How are security practitioners and developers communicating with each other? I say, while we have a lot of great tools, that communication, it really hasn't improved at all. There's not a unified API that is in widespread use that's allowing, these security events to be transmitted throughout the enterprise. So I think we need to adopt an API that allows us to do this. And when we can do that, right, I think we can actually make some advances in connecting these different tools together.
So when you say communicating, Cole, you're not talking just the email exchanges or Slack messages we're doing. You're talking about, coupled with our software, also, what do we need to communicate about what's, to your point about being in Jordan, what's been done, what security measures have been taken, validations, attestations. Is that kind of what you're referring to? Or you're talking about the whole stack of communicating?
Yeah, everything, right? The software development lifecycle is a huge amount of events, right? You may have something that happens in a GRC system like ServiceNow, like a vendor gets onboarded. Then a developer gets a ticket to write some infrastructure as code, right? And so that's another action, right? Then that infrastructure as code gets scanned. That's another event that happens, right? So really, whatever the organization governance says they have to do, what their policy is, we got to make sure that happens, right? Because that's how we manage risk. And right now, we're just running those tools, and we're not actually validating that the process took place.
Interesting. I would imagine that's pretty widespread, at least it seems in my experience. Everybody seems to be at that level. I don't say everybody, but this is more common than not common. True?
Yeah, and what we found was, myself, my co-founder, and a bunch of members from the community worked on, a few years ago, we worked on the CNCF software supply chain best practices. Mm-hmm. And then there was a follow-up to that, which was the software factory reference architecture. Right? And what we found in those papers is there's a really major component missing in most software delivery life cycles, and that is the concept of this observer. And so I'm going to actually talk about an analogy, or talk about this through an analogy. Now, imagine that you have a daughter and that she's getting married, and the most important thing to her on her wedding day is this wedding cake. It's got to be perfect, right? And she's got very specific instructions about this wedding cake. She's got some bridesmaids with some allergies. She wants her Nana's recipe for cream filling, right? It's got to be the right ornaments on top, right? So you, as the father of the bride, you go to the baker and you have this very detailed list of requirements on how this cake needs to get made. So we hand this list over to the baker, and then maybe a couple of weeks, a month later, that cake gets delivered to the wedding reception. And now we have to trust that this cake was made the way we expect it to, right? So this means that we have to have trust in that baker. This day is not ruined for our daughter. But instead, what happens if we hire someone to watch every single step of that cake being made, right? A trusted observer to watch, how many times does that baker wash her hands? Is this cake getting made, in Russia, or is this cake being made in Washington, D.C., right? What temperature is the oven set to? What are those ingredients? Right, that's an S-bomb, by the way. Like just the ingredients.
Sounding pretty familiar. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of other things that go into it, right? So you have this person observing all these steps, and after each step, what they do is they write it down on a piece of paper, and then they sign it and they put it in an envelope. So now when that cake gets delivered, we can deliver these envelopes along with that cake. And now as the father of the bride, you can open up these envelopes. As long as you trust that signature on the envelope that came from that trusted observer, you know exactly how this cake was made, right? So now you can have trust in the cake without having trust in the baker, right?
It's a great analogy. So draw an analog then to kind of steps in the software delivery life cycle, software development life cycle, and what that observer role looks like.
Right. So there's different ways that you can observe the components or software being built, right? You can query an API and get information from that and sign it. You can run a trace on a build process, right, and record that and sign that with a machine identity, right? So just like the observer is writing down every single step of that cake being made, right? We need to have some sort of observation process writing the steps of that software being made. And it needs to be done in a very specific way, right? If we just have random log data, it's really hard to aggregate and correlate. It becomes very difficult. I think this is what a lot of organizations are doing right now. But if we use a specification such as the CNCF in total specification to record this metadata, it really becomes portable and usable across the enterprise. In addition, you can use policy to write policy against these attestations to cryptographically prove that the steps in the supply chain happen, right? So just like that father of the bride opens that envelope, we have automated controllers that can open envelopes and inspect that attestation data to know that, hey, this piece of software underwent the steps that our governance documents say they have to go under.
Mm-hmm. Interesting too, and you talk about just having access to the data, the log data, whatever it might be from the tools or the tool chain you're using. That doesn't mean you can assemble all of that into a meaningful way. Like, yeah, the build succeeded, a scan ran, but what happened? Well, that information happens from a scan tool and a build tool and 5 other things along the way. And are you correlating that in the right way? It seems what you're prescribing is, there's a way to document or communicate that attestation so that it's in a form that you can rely on and know that it's accurate and not just coming out of some tool. Who knows if that's really what occurred?
Exactly. And that's exactly what we're doing in the Intellido community. It's a community of a bunch of security practitioners and companies really focus on this concept of observability and standardization of observational supply chain metadata, and then how to enforce that as well. So we're big members in that community, but we're only a part of it. NYU, Purdue, Google, Microsoft, all attend the community meetings and make contributions to that specification.
Yeah, it's a very rich and active group. Talk a little bit about, I'd love to hear more about Testify SEC's go-to-market plan and how you're kind of taking these ideas to market.
Yeah. So we're building a platform judge, and this is built on our open core Witness and Archivista. Those are 2 CNCF projects that implement the Intoto specification. Witness is that pipeline observer. We're currently working on some integrations with GitLab. We'll have some announcements about that in the next couple of months. We have a GitHub action that allows you to create these attestations. And then Archivista is the data store for all these attestations, right? And it will store any attestation and total attestations that you create, whether that comes from the Witness tool that we support or another tool that generates in total conformant attestations. So what we've done is we've put this together in an AWS Marketplace offering, along with some SigSort components and a user interface that allows you to search these attestations. So that's actually coming out in preview. We're releasing that in preview at KubeCon. So if you're interested in that, please reach out and we can set you up with a trial of that Marketplace offering.
Okay, very good. And we'll hit this at the end too, but if folks want to reach out about that specifically, do they email you, go to testifysec.com? What's the best way to raise your hand and say, I'd like to participate?
Hey, well, first of all, if you're at KubeCon, come out and say hi to us. We'll be walking around the show floor. We have a bunch of talks going on. But otherwise, if you're not, visit our website. And you can find a contact us or there's a button that says contact us for the preview, and click that, fill out a form, and we'll get right back to you right away.
Excellent. I'd love to kind of connect the dots too then from what you've put together for this offering with, you have folks, the software developers, maybe DevOps engineers or folks that are managing the tools that are part of creating software. You also have where there's governance or whatever the name of the organization, part of the organization that's looking for this verification of, software supply chain security attestations and things like that. As your go-to-market, are you talking more to the developer folks, or do you think it's more the compliance teams that are saying, we have a way of helping you not make this such an onerous task? Come look at these folks from Testify Sec.
Well, we really provide value to both sides of that coin, right? I think our goal is to unite developers and cybersecurity teams. And we do that through this API. So for the developer, right, we don't want to create extra tasks for us. In fact, one of our customers, they spend 8 hours every single week moving evidence from their supply chain platform into SharePoint, so then it can be evaluated to see if they meet compliance or not, right? We've eliminated that task from them. Now that the developer is really focused on developing features, rather than moving files around, right? So they're having a better experience. And then on the other side, right, that CISO that has to inspect this material, now they have it in a very organized fashion where they can generate some reports against it, and they have full visibility of that project that we're working on with them, right? They don't have to go ask the developer, hey, did you do your scans last week, right? What are your vulnerabilities, right? Is this artifact FedRAMP compliant? Like, these are things that we have that data for, so that CISO or the security team can go look at it and really understand the state of that artifact.
Excellent. I mean, we always think about highly regulated industries, government, military, as prime candidates for this kind of technology and needing these kind of solutions. Is that still primary target, or do you audience, or do you see now there's enough stuff going on? The president's order on security and reporting, breaks and compromises, and it seems like this is getting elevated for all of us, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
It is. But the problem is it's really expensive to comply with some of these regulations, right? So that's pushing a lot of the startups out of some of these markets. And what we want to do here at Testify Sec is over time really lower the cost of complying with things such as like EO 14028 and the SSDF and NIST 800-53 when it comes to software manufacturing, right? If we can lower that cost for these organizations, we can help them enter in that marketplace. So that's really a core goal of what we want to do here at Testify Sec.
Fantastic. You mentioned KubeCon and doing some talks or things at KubeCon. What kind of subjects are you talking about? I'm curious.
Oh, wow. We have so many talks. Let me look at my list here. So sure. One of them, actually, Cairo, he's a maintainer of RSTUF, and he's doing a talk on how you can use RSTUF to secure any artifact repository. And I think he's using JFrog Artifactory for that one. Thomas Meadows, he's our maintainer for Witness, and he's showing a integration between a Teslagon, which is a controller he built that takes tetragon BPF traces for supply chain metadata, right? So that way now we can use the power of BPF to really inspect exactly what is happening in our builds. This has the potential to possibly even mitigate things like solar winds or build system compromise. So really interesting talk. Take a look at that. And then we have a panel discussion with our director of open source, John Schell. It's talking about SBOMs and perspectives on cloud native security. So talking about, hey, what are the limitations of SBOMs and what are the other tools that are out there to really do that full verification of the software supply chain, right? Because SBOMs, right, are just about that ingredients, but they don't tell us if those ingredients were assembled in China, right? So,
exactly.
So that talk will really be focused on how we fix some of those issues.
Doesn't mean they were assembled in the right way either, right? It's just
right? And there's a lot of issues with SBOMs. I think it's a really great tool, but it's got its limitations. I think there needs to be a little bit of additional education around that. So I'm really excited to hear that talk.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll be able to make it to all of them. That the eBIF sounds one really, in particular. If you're dealing with things at the kernel level, obviously less chance something else is going to get in the middle and compromise what you're seeing happening.
Yeah, that's the thing. If you can query the kernel, you're taking a lot of the stuff out of it, and if you can at least you have to have trust in something, right? So if you can have trust in the kernel, that's great. I think there's some stuff coming out with confidential computing where we might not even have to do that in the future, but there's a lot of really great work going on in supply chain security. KubeCon should be pretty great. I know there's a lot of great talks.
Well, fantastic. Look forward to seeing you there and talking some more. Again, how can folks get a hold of you if they want to meet up at KubeCon or want to find out more about how to join the early premiere of your product?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is actually really great to get a hold of me. I'm pretty active on there. And then you can go to testifysec.com, hit contact us, and we'll reach out right away. That goes right to our Slack, so we'll reach right out. Otherwise, you should find me at all these talks I just mentioned at KubeCon. And then, like I said, we're releasing that AWS Marketplace offering. So if you're looking to enhance your software supply chain security and you're looking at things like Fulcio and SigStore and attestation, reach out. I'm happy to talk just about what your problems are and some of the solutions we have to help accelerate some of those efforts.
Fantastic. Well, good luck and congratulations on the progress so forward, and look forward to seeing more great things from you and the TestifySec team.
Oh, yeah. It'll be great. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Cole, great to see you, and we'll see you again in a few weeks, not too long from now. Thanks for joining us.
Cloud Native Now is the web's leading resource for the growing cloud native ecosystem. CloudNativeNow.com is your destination for news, thought leadership, features, and webinars on cloud native architecture, Kubernetes, serverless, cloud native application development, microservices, service mesh, cloud native security, and more. Stay on the cutting edge of modern application development at Cloud Native Now.
Next up, we have a session from our recent Predict virtual event, which was back in January now, coming up on the end of these. But this one is about a Kubernetes benchmark report. We're joined by Joe Pelletier, VP of Product Strategy for Fairwinds, who really, the Fairwinds people are some of the sharpest Kube people I know out there. And they're going to review the results of over 150,000 scanned workloads to find out what's working and what needs to be improved. It was a great session if you're into Kubernetes and stuff. Here it is from Predict.
All right, I'm really excited today to share a little bit about Fairwind's Kubernetes benchmark report for 2024. We're really kind of proud of some of the work that our team has put together over the past few weeks, getting this report ready for the new year, and excited to kind of share some of the findings that we observed by studying over 330,000 workloads. So just as a quick introduction, my name is Joe Pelletier. I'm a product manager here at Fairwinds. Been in the Kubernetes and container space for a little over 5 years, and been working on the Fairwinds Insights product. Like I mentioned, we actually have done this report now for, this is the third year, and we've analyzed over 330,000 workloads to inform the data behind this report. It's the largest number of workloads we've ever analyzed for the report. And it includes more than a dozen different types of policies covering kind of reliability, security, as well as cost efficiency. And when it comes to Kubernetes, we find that organizations really have to, consider all three types of checks here in order to make sure that they are running workloads that align with best practices. This gives you a little bit of an example of the types of policies we've evaluated. I won't go through every single one, but we'll be covering some of these in today's presentation. The final report actually covers a number of different categories of policies and provides a lot more depth than what we'll be able to cover in today's session. So I do recommend that you download the report. I think what you'll see in today's presentation is sort of a summary and abridged version, and hopefully kind of see a little bit of where the industry is going in terms of both kind of Kubernetes best practices and sort of how well organizations are aligning to those best practices as well. Okay, so a common graph that you're going to see in this report is will look like this. And what I'll do is spend a little bit of time just explaining how to read the report and how to read the different charts and graphs that you're seeing. So on the left, on the y-axis here, you'll see sort of the percentage of workloads impacted within an organization. And on the x-axis, you'll see the percentage of organizations that were evaluated in terms of how many of their workloads were actually impacted, by the as a percentage. And so a great way to kind of read this report or this example here is, if you take this example, the number of organizations with less than 10% of workloads impacted has fallen from 46% in 2022 to 21% in 2023. And so when you see something like that, where the number of organizations that have such a small percentage of workloads impacted decrease, it actually demonstrates that the problem might be getting harder to control. And so that's some of the ways that we've been able to kind of highlight information in this report. And you'll see that in just kind of various different aspects of today's presentation and when you read the final piece. So let's kick it off with sort of the highlight from this year's analysis, which is really this really kind of interesting fact that over 1/3 of organizations today, and specifically 37% of organizations, need to actually right-size their containers to improve efficiency. And when we dig into some of that, those details, we'll notice that actually this 37% of organizations have 50% or more of their containers that are over-provisioned. And it's an interesting finding because what we notice is that a lot of times developers have to guess their resource requests and limits when they go to deploy it, because they don't really have the tooling or the feedback loops to tell them what those resource requests and limits should be. And a lot of times developers will guess high. They will over-provision by giving their application too much memory or too much compute. And when left unchecked or unmonitored, organizations end up incurring lots of additional compute spend as a result. And so this is the first year that we actually started looking at this data. And again, you'll see that the 37% of organizations that need to right-size, 50% or more of their containers really represents the bottom part of this this chart. But it's also interesting to see that there's actually a large cohort of organizations, in this case, 57% of organizations that have less than or equal to 10% of their workloads impacted. So some organizations do seem to get this right. And what we're really excited to do is monitor this progress over the years. So this being our first year measuring this, we want to see sort of how well has this trend improved or not improved going into next year as well. So again, first year we're kind of baselining this, but next year should help us understand where that trend is going. Another aspect of kind of Kubernetes efficiency that's important to solve is really making sure that both memory and CPU requests are set on deployments before they're actually set to run in Kubernetes. Now, Kubernetes technically makes these settings optional, but when you don't set memory or CPU requests, it can actually make it difficult for Kubernetes to properly schedule that workload. And so what we're seeing is that this is becoming more and more of a systemic issue. This year, we're noticing that 78% of organizations have at least 10% of their workloads missing CPU requests, and this is up from about 50% last year. So again, I think the numbers are all over the map here. You'll see that pretty much every organization has some amount of this problem. But interestingly enough, this is actually a fairly easy thing to solve with guardrails and policy enforcement mechanisms for Kubernetes, where you can kind of give developers feedback at the time of their pull request or at the time of their deployment when they are missing these settings, and use that as an opportunity to educate developers as well. So we think that while a lot of organizations may be having missing CPU requests, we also think this could be a potentially easily solved problem with policy enforcement and guardrail tools as well. Let's shift a little bit to reliability and kind of look at a few different trends that we've observed in this year's report. So just at a very high level, about a quarter of organizations today are relying on a cache version for 90% of their images. And what does that mean? Well, it really means that the pull policy is not set to always, which is a general best practice. You kind of want to make sure that your containers are pulling the latest image so that you don't have inconsistency And it also can help you from a security perspective as well to make sure that when you do push an image with updates, that it's actually pulling in that latest image as well, not just the cache version. So this is just a general best practice that, we're seeing that right now about 24% of organizations are relying on this pull policy not being set to always for 90% of their images. Another pattern that we're seeing is that container health checks seem to be missing or ignored in some deployments as well. And so right now, about 66% of liveness and 69% of readiness probes are missing in Kubernetes deployments. And it's important to set these because it helps Kubernetes automatically restart containers and ensure that the applications are available to receive traffic and then ultimately serve users. So this is actually considered one of the more basic ways to ensure application reliability in Kube. And we're still seeing that organizations struggle to various degrees here. I think part of it is because the configuration does require a little bit of application-specific input. So development teams need to, consider, what are the changes they need to make to their application in order to make sure that the health checks works for Kubernetes. So we're hoping that this trend kind of improves over the years as well. Another trend that we identified is that deployments are missing replicas. This is another general best practice, is to make sure that there's a few different, there's a couple replicas available for pods, and that right now we're noticing that 30% of organizations actually have less than 10% of their deployments missing replicas. So this is an improvement over 2023, but still kind of, highlights that if you look at the graphic here, that some organizations have, much more than just 10% impacted. There might be, lots of applications missing replicas. And I think sometimes this is because of what we call the copy and paste problem. Sometimes a deployment from one team that's missing this best practice gets copied from another team who's looking to get their application deployed. And so they may be, propagating these misconfigurations where replicas aren't set on the previous team, and now the new team is using that same configuration without replicas. And so you can see that this becomes sort of a wider problem. Again, this is usually a very quick fix, like a one-line change to your infrastructure as code. And we're hoping to see, even though we're on an improvement path here, that even more and more organizations have fewer and fewer deployments missing these replicas. Shifting gears a little bit, we'll also take a look at security. Now, security in Kubernetes can mean a lot of different things. We look at security from two lenses in this report. One is from image vulnerabilities, as well as from the kind of the configuration itself. So the YAML or the Helm chart that's being deployed. At a very high level, we're noticing that about 28% of organizations are running about 90% of their workloads with insecure capabilities. So that means that they're adding some sort of insecure capability like net admin. And a lot of times it actually might be necessary for some applications or workloads to have these additional capabilities, but sometimes it may not be. And it could be, accidentally added to apps, going back to that original copy and paste problem where one team copies the configuration from another team as a starting point, and inadvertently propagate some of these misconfigurations going forward. So we always look to make sure that applications start with not having these dangerous or insecure capabilities added, and that helps ensure kind of a good baseline from a security perspective. One positive, though, trend coming out of this year's report is that we're actually seeing fewer containers set to run as root. So 30% of organizations today are running 70% or more of their containers as root, which is actually a drop from 44% in last year's report. And part of me thinks that this is another example of sort of a low-hanging opportunity to make a quick win, a quick fix to containers by essentially turning off the ability to run as root, which again is a one-line change. And I think we also see that this example, this type of misconfiguration example, is sort of very popular when talking about the issues of misconfigurations of Kubernetes. A lot of organizations talk about, as an example, running as root being a common example of that. So it's great to see that this trend is going in the right direction. in that fewer and fewer organizations have a vast majority of their containers running as root, and that seems to be going in decline, which is awesome. And I think it's important to note that, running a container as root, just overall, it increases the risk of a malicious user taking advantage of that root privilege as part of a larger attack. So you want to kind of, from a defense in depth perspective, by default, have your container not run as root unless it absolutely needs to because of some special need or use case for that app. So again, this is going in the right direction, and we hope it stays that way going forward as well. Switching gears a little bit away from kind of misconfigurations, we'll talk about image vulnerabilities. And so this is, the image vulnerabilities that may exist in running containers or as part of, scanning container images as part of your, CI/CD process or your shift left process. And I think this is an ongoing challenge for many organizations. It's an ongoing problem, but we do see some signs of progress in this year's report. So if we actually dig into the first section where we show the percentage of workloads impacted, 26% of organizations have less than 10% of their workloads affected, which is an improvement from 12% in 2023. So we're seeing essentially a greater percentage of organizations with fewer workloads impacted due to image vulnerabilities. And I think that is a signal of both kind of organizations upgrading their third-party containers to newer, less vulnerable versions, but also integrating and scanning more of their containers so that they have a process in place for this. In the report, you're also going to see a section where we talk about unscanned images. So Fairwinds is able to kind of help companies identify if there's images running in their cluster that they have not scanned. And this has greatly improved over the year. We're actually seeing almost 80% of organizations getting almost complete scan coverage of containers in their runtime. That's up from 64% last year. So I think that's a great sign that organizations are kind of doing the first step, which is scanning as many of their images as possible so that they understand their risk and then taking remediation after that. So we hope that next year we even see a higher percentage of organizations with fewer workloads affected. One of the enhancements that we made to Fairwinds Insights last year was we added some specific checks related to the NSA hardening guide. So the NSA actually released Kubernetes hardening guidance, I think back in 2021. And there was a number of great recommendations there, and we actually expanded the number of checks that Fairwinds Insights offers to match what the recommendations were in the NSA hardening guide. So a lot of new security checks kind of made its way into the Fairwinds Insights platform this year. One of those checks is actually verifying if there's a network policy configured for workloads. And network policies are increasingly important because it helps you kind of segment workload traffic and ensure that you've got controls around which pods can speak to which pods. And so we wanted to get a sense of how is the industry doing on this particular policy. And so I think we see kind of two types of organizations. 37%, or about a third of organizations today, have less than 10% of their workloads without a network policy. And that's actually a great sign that there's a lot of network policy adoption happening in some organizations where they're making sure that their workloads have a network policy set. But on the other hand, there's still a majority of organizations that have way more than 50% of their workloads without a network policy. So it means that they're deploying to Kubernetes, their workload's running fine, but that workload can speak to any other workload in the cluster. And so I think it shows that the industry still has a little bit of ways to go to make sure that network policy adoption is even more widespread and more adopted. And so just to kind of give a little bit of an example of why we think this is important, network policies help you limit that egress and ingress traffic. And so when you have that ability to control the traffic, it allows you to kind of, again, from a defensive depth perspective, prevent any undesirable access to those pods. So those are some of the summaries and the highlights from the report. Again, I think it's probably we're only covering about a quarter of the information that the report has this year. But I wanted to kind of also help organizations understand what is a path forward. Like if you're running lots of Kubernetes today, how do you ensure that your teams are following reliable, security, and cost-efficient best practices? And I think that's really where Fairwinds Insights can provide a lot of value. It can provide, guardrails to help you solve your business problems, whether it's ensuring that your images are free of vulnerabilities, or that your workloads are aligned to standards like the NSA hardening guide, or aligned to standards like SOC 2 or ISO 27001. There's a big security reason to provide developers with guardrails and feedback around their configuration hygiene. I think increasingly in 2023, we did notice that a lot of organizations were very cost conscious. So they wanted to make sure that they had a way to measure their container usage, but also right-size containers to properly make sure that it's using the correct memory and CPU, and they're not overspending in ways that incurs additional cost or just wastes compute resources. So Fairwinds does provide sort of both Kubernetes cost allocation as well as container right-sizing recommendations. And that's helped organizations in some cases save over 25% on their container costs. And then finally, this notion of guardrails is sort of core to everything that we do. So, in order to make sure that engineers have the tools to take action on this feedback, you want to be able to provide guardrails at different steps in the process, whether it's at time of pull request when they're making their infrastructure as code changes, or at the time of deployment, also known as the time of admission, when applications are being deployed into the Kubernetes environment. You want to give that feedback to developers and have both like a way for them to remediate things easily, but also ensure consistency so that you're not introducing risk or over-provisioned applications along the way. And these are kind of the core capabilities that Fairwinds Insights provides and how our customers are getting value. So I do encourage you to kind of take a look at the Kubernetes configuration benchmark report for this year. Like I said, we only really covered about a quarter of what's in that report, and there's a lot more broken out by security, cost, and reliability, so you can kind of see the different patterns. So if you're interested, I'd recommend going to fairwinds.com. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to point you in the right direction. And I think that's really kind of what we're hoping to cover today. So thanks again for the time, and looking forward to hearing your thoughts out there in the community.
Next up, we've got two View with Vizards. Mike Vizard, Chief Content Officer here. In the first episode, Mike interviews Anna Poblitz, who's the head of password lists for 1Password. Been waiting for this one a while. And Anna is going to explain how developers and the DevOps teams that support them play a crucial role in the effort to improve cybersecurity by eliminating passwords. Can't happen soon enough for me. Great interview here with Anna. Check it out.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Anna Poblitz, who's head of password lists for 1Password. And we're going to be talking about, well, the role developers play, and along with that, DevOps, in moving to this brand new future of no passwords that we're all hoping to get to. And I think it's a journey, but we'll see where we are. Anna, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mike. Happy to be here.
We've been talking about this, and there's a lot of different flavors of it, and it's not clear to me that everybody kind of understands what it is we're trying to achieve here, because I think we all agree we don't like username and passwords, and we also know that they get hacked, but we're not quite clear what do we got to do to get from where we are, and how are developers supposed to make all this happen?
Yeah, I think it makes sense to start with like exactly what you said. Where are we hoping to get, right? I think the biggest problem with passwords, and there are a lot, but I think the pointed one for this conversation is that they leave a lot of the burden on being secure to the users themselves, right? You as a user have to think up a good password, remember it, not write it down, not fall for a phishing attack. With passkeys, the goal is to remove all of that burden from you as a user to logging in, right? It should happen automatically. It should be built into the technology. And so it looks and feels to you like you're just using your Touch ID or your Windows Hello. but behind the scenes, you're getting this really great secure experience with the frictionless, convenient experience of Touch ID. And so that's where we're trying to get, right? That's kind of the goal. Now, there are a lot of things that need to happen for that to be a reality, right? Passwords have been around for decades, maybe like 50 years, maybe more. And so we have a long way to go, even just getting normal people more comfortable with a new technology. So I think that's one side of things, right? And then there's the developer side of this, where apps and websites have to actually build this technology into their websites in a way that feels easy for users and can build this like really complex technology in a way that's easy for developers to build, maintain, all of that kind of stuff.
And what is the challenge with that? Because we've been, as developers, working around quote unquote secrets and username and passwords for a while. So what are we asking developers to do exactly to move beyond that?
Yeah, there's a few things I think are challenging about passkeys. And one is that you suddenly have this model of a single user will have multiple devices and credentials floating out there. With a password, you have one password, and that moves between all your devices because it's in your head or it's in your password manager, right? And so you're authenticating the exact same way, no matter where you are in the world or what device you're on. With passkeys, that changes, and it's really dependent on what device you're on, where you're storing your passkeys. If it's in, say, your Google account or your 1Password account, or maybe on a hardware key like a YubiKey, that can change the experience a lot that you're having on the website. And so there's just a lot more like edge cases and user flows you have to think about, right? Like, yes, you have to use the APIs, and developers are smart and they can do all of that. It's also the like designing a good user flow and like, what does that look like? And there's just not a lot of information out there right now on that. And that's something that like us at 1Password and Passage have been thinking about, that the FIDO Alliance has been thinking a lot about, like helping companies and developers like design a really good intuitive user flow based on all the years of research that we've been doing.
And that sounds like the trick, because a lot of times users will complain when you change anything, and then they'll complain when you don't change anything because their username and passwords have been stolen. So how does the developer figure out what is the most natural workflow for shifting to that kind of passkey model? Is it trial and error? Are there best practices you can point to? Classes? How do we get there?
Yeah, there's a little bit of everything, and something that I think has been getting a lot better over the last couple months. I think early on, maybe like a year ago when we last talked, a lot of the guidance was really around, here's Passkeys 101, right? Here's what a passkey is. Here's how to use it. It wasn't really the nitty gritty of like, here are problems your users might encounter when they go to use a passkey. And like, what do you do in that case? Like, what if they don't have a passkey? Now we're really shifting to a lot of the guidance, and the tooling and the technology is more around giving these like completed user flows and giving companies and developers more like flexibility in how they offer passkeys. One thing that I've really noticed in the last year of adoption, you've had all these like huge companies add passkeys, right? Google, TikTok, like household names. I think Target was just a couple of days ago released passkeys, which is really incredible. But they're typically not, they're doing it in a way that is like adding passkeys as an option for their login, right? They still typically have a password, and then the user could go add a password or passkey in their profile and then start to use that going forward. And what we're finding is companies want to do that to help make their users more comfortable, to understand what's working well for them. And so we need to give people, these developers, tools to actually build that way, if that's the way they prefer to build, over, you know, going all in on passkeys up front, right? And I think that's just a more realistic way. You can do really great like A/B testing and understand the value you're getting from passkeys and like migrate over time. So for example, at 1Password, you know, we have a product called Passage that is all about making it easy. It's like a toolkit for developers to implement passkeys. And originally we were really all about this, like all in on passwordless methods, for logging in, no passwords. And what we've learned is that people need to be able to use our product alongside of whatever their existing authentication system is. So we created a product for that, to make it easier for them to kind of slowly add passkeys over time, to have really well-informed user flows. Like that is the thing that people need and businesses need in order to be successful here, and really drive not just the existence of passkey login on their website, but end users actually using that, right? That's what's really important, is that the end users are using the technology.
Do we need to go in and quote unquote modernize that authentication experience for all our existing applications? Or are we just drawing a line in the sand and saying all new stuff from here will be like this and we'll just keep this old stuff around for as long as we can or until we just can't tolerate it anymore?
I really wish it could be the second one and just kind of say everything in 2024 uses passkeys, right? Like I would love that for that to be the reality, but I just don't think it's super realistic. What I'm seeing is that there are a set of companies that are really excited to go fully passwordless, and they're using passkeys and then maybe something like an OTP code or a magic link as a fallback option. So there's no password involved at all, right? I'm seeing like a set of companies that are excited about that. And then I'm seeing a set of companies that maybe they just have like a really complex authentication infrastructure, and it's a pretty big lift to sort of change everything. So they're just adding passkeys as this option. And I actually think that's a really reasonable and good way to introduce this to their end users. You can start to prompt users at certain points in their usage of the app, like, hey, we noticed you went to reset your password. Would you like to instead make a passkey, right? And like, that's going to be a better experience, especially when you just forgot your password and had to go through that whole process. And so I think we have to be able to support both, even if I would love to really lean into a passkey only world. I just don't think it's realistic. And so we have to support the Targets and the Googles and the TikToks of the world in the way that they're building and setting that example for other companies.
Can I get to the point where maybe AI will save us from ourselves and I just want something to pop up and says, would you like these credentials to be magically transformed into a set of passwordless keys? Can I get there?
Yeah, we actually have been talking about something sort of like that in the FIDO Alliance, which is like a group of companies working to make passwordless authentication a reality. And we've been talking about how do we do better onboarding of passkeys? Like, can we automatically create passkeys for people on websites and then let them know they're available? Or is that something that, 1Password and Google and Apple could do? And so we've been talking a lot about how to make, like, really driving specifically end user adoption more so even than website or business adoption, making sure the websites that do have it, their end users are really seeing it. They're able to enroll passkeys. They want to use the technology. And so we're looking at like better ways to do that, to exactly your point.
Do you think the bad guys are kind of slightly bemused as they look at a struggle with all this stuff? Because we have so many username and password combos on the dark web. I often wonder, are there more username and passwords on the dark web than there are actively being used by humans?
Quite possibly, honestly. I think, what I'm seeing, obviously there are big security benefits to passkeys. Getting rid of passwords is a really big deal for preventing phishing attacks, any of these credential stuffing type of attacks that you see. But I think in the short term, what's really happening is more about the convenience and the user experience. As an example, if you have password login and a passkey login to a website like Target, you're not actually like meaningfully improving your security, right? You still have a password that can access your account. That password could still be leaked or brute forced or any number of other things. But we're getting people comfortable with the convenience and the like frictionless experience of passkeys. We're giving businesses the benefits around like fast sign-ins, better conversions. And then I think the security benefits will come later as we start to actually drop passwords from those accounts completely. So it's sort of like a short-term convenience, business benefits around conversion, and then longer term, we'll start to really see the security benefits from passkeys.
What will be the role of the DevOps/DevSecOps folks in this conversation, not to mention a few of their cybersecurity colleagues? Can they force this issue with developers? How do they kind of put something in place that perhaps gently guides people to the right answer?
Yeah, I think, there are obviously a lot of security benefits to passkeys, and I think there's an argument to be made for there's sort of a security angle for why a company might implement passkeys, or there's a conversion, fast sign-in type of reason for adopting passkeys. And so I think security folks, engineers can really influence product decisions in this case around the benefits of security because you get both, right? You can say like, we want passkeys for security, also, here are all the great other benefits that you're going to get. And so they're able to sort of influence the business in that way. I think developers in particular are interesting. One of our philosophies is that I think passkeys solve an individual problem that we need to then solve at scale, right? Passkeys are great for users because they're secure, they're easy, but that doesn't really matter unless we can scale the passkey infrastructure to all of these enormous websites and things that you're using every single day and logging in. And I think developers and security team members can be really effective at getting new technology into companies. They tend to be very technology forward consumers themselves. And so they know about this technology. So they're usually the first adopters of this type of technology. And then they can help bring that into their organizations. So I think it's super important to partner with developers, to partner with security, DevOps teams, to actually give them the support that they need to then vouch for this type of technology in their organization.
So how do we get developers more involved in this conversation? Because it's not like I walk down the street and I'm seeing the No More Passwords rally. So how do we kind of get them to go, yeah, this is what we're going to do. We're all going to collectively do it together. It seems like it's all on the happenstance side.
Yeah, I've actually seen a lot of progress in the last year. And I think that's a really good sign. This stuff does take time, even if I sometimes wish it could just, I'm like, everyone should know about this by now. And that's not really the reality. But compared to a year ago, if I just talked to a developer at sort of a random company, they're a lot more likely to know about passkeys than they were a year ago. And I think that's really cool. I think part of that comes from awareness and like user education. Like I said, these developers, DevOps, security folks tend to be very technology forward. They're using the tools that they're using, like 1Password or GitHub. Like when companies like that implement passkey support, developers are a lot more likely than maybe my mom or like the average person to try out that technology. And so I think getting them exposure in the places that they're at already can help just build their knowledge about it, their curiosity about it, and give them the tools to say, like, this was a really cool thing I saw that GitHub or 1Password did. We should do that here, right? And like kind of meeting them where they're at in that way.
As we get to this brave new thing, we also hear a lot about multi-factor authentication and biometrics. Where does that fit in this whole conversation? I mean, are they all forms of a passwordless system and I'm going to use different ones for different use cases, or how will I ultimately orchestrate all that?
I think it'll really depend on the use case, especially enterprise use cases might be pretty different than consumer. But I think for most consumer cases, you can really think about a passkey as roughly 2 factors of authentication as we think about it in the traditional sense. It's something you have, like a device, and something you are. Usually you have like a Touch ID or a Face ID prompt as part of that. And so there is a level of sort of 2 different factors of authentication within a passkey, which we're hoping can really help with those like really high security use cases you might have, like a bank or something along those lines. And so, there is a biometric aspect of this in the sense that it all lives on your device. It's just using your Touch ID. There is a sense of multi-factor authentication as well. Enterprise, things like that, we might see passkeys more as a second factor for a while, in addition to a password or something like that. But I think we'll just like slowly discover what that looks like. I think the consumer market especially has a lower tolerance for friction as users logging in, right? And so we'll really kind of lean on passkeys in that sense and not want to add a bunch of like additional factors on top of that when they don't necessarily add a lot of security.
All right. Well, folks, when you think about it, we've been using passwords since the first caveman grunted, "Who goes there?" and somebody gave the cosign, and it's given the advancements in human society. Perhaps it's time to think of some other way to do this. Hey, Anna, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Mike.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
In our second view with Vizard today, Mike interviews Rubrik CTO Nitro Nithrakashaya. And there he explains how data protection has evolved as an IT discipline for ensuring cybersecurity and resilience on the 10th anniversary of the founding of Rubrik. Congratulations to Rubrik. Check this out.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Arvind Nithrakashayap, also known as Nitro, who's CTO for Rubrik, and we're talking about the 10th anniversary of a company that kind of helped pioneer the whole notion of data protection as a service. And well, we've come a long way since then. Nitro, welcome to the show.
Great to meet you, Mike, and thanks for having me on the show.
I think if we go back in time 10 years ago, even though you guys kind of pioneered that notion of putting it up in the cloud and managing it centrally, a lot of people said, boy, do we really need another data protection platform? Because there was plenty of them out there already. Looking back at it now, 10 years, I mean, what's your sense of why did it gain traction and what keeps it having that traction?
Absolutely. I think when we started on this journey, when you looked at this area, especially back up, there were two issues there. One is there was a lot of complexity, right? If you think about most organizations running the applications in the data center, they were often buying backup software from one vendor, backup storage from another vendor, media servers from a third vendor, putting it all together and making it all work. And after all of this, if you ask them, do you have confidence that you can recover your data when you need it? Most 90% of them said, no, I don't know. I don't know whether it will work or not. So there was a lot of complexity with no guarantee that it will work, right? So this is problem number one. Now, if you go back 15 years and you ask people, why do you care about data protection? Most people would say, I'm worried about human error. I'm worried about disaster like flood, earthquake, where I lose all my data center, and how do I recover from that? Fast forward to now, or even 5 years back, I think if you ask the question, what are you most worried about? Most people say, I'm worried about cyber attacks. I'm worried about attackers coming into my organization, deleting my data, or potentially exfiltrating the data, right? So one of the as a new company looking at the space, and we had a clean sheet of paper and we could rebuild everything from scratch, we felt that we could solve both of these problems, right? So the one thing was, how can we modernize this whole area and bring in a single stack of software that removes all this complexity and makes it very easy for customers to go and protect their data. Our inspiration was, if you think about it, all of us have our mobile phones and our lives depend on it. But if you lose your mobile phone, I actually sent mine through a wash cycle. It took 15 minutes to buy a new phone and recover all my data because it was automatically being backed up to the cloud. So the one aspect was, can we modernize this and bring a completely simple, modern user experience, operationally very easy solution to the market? And the second big realization we had was backup and recovery is not the same as cyber resilience. These require two different solutions, and two different solutions at an architectural level. Very often when you have a cyber attack, you're not trying to go and say, okay, let me get the latest backup and restore it. What you're trying to do is you're trying to answer a few questions. What was impacted? Was my sensitive data impacted? What is the blast radius of the attack? Was there any data that's exfiltrated? Is the attacker still at large? If I restore all my systems, am I still back to square one where the attacker would come and do this to me again? So what this requires is a very different architecture which can provide answers to these solutions. And these were the problems we went out to solve. And because we were starting afresh, we could build a brand new architecture that could address all these problems. And we believe that's why it gained traction. Initially, we gained a lot of traction because of our simplicity and the complexity that we removed. But very quickly, people realized that with cyber attacks becoming a bigger and bigger threat, we had a platform that could address these issues and help them recover from cyber attacks.
Flash forward to today. I think when you started, the person who was in charge of this decision was fairly lower on the IT totem pole, and they might have been a storage person or an admin. Has this whole platform become a a much more strategic conversation in the age of ransomware. And who's involved in making these decisions these days?
Absolutely. I think there are two big trends we've seen, and this has changed in the 10 years we've been in business. The whole ransomware question has become a board level question. There are board members now asking the CEOs, are you prepared for a ransomware attack? Because everybody's come to realize that a cyber attack it's a matter of, when and not if. And I mean, you just have to go into the news to see the number of very, very large organizations that have been, victims of cyber attacks. So every board is asking this question of the CEOs, and this has become a top priority. Secondly, what we're seeing is this realization that data is the most critical asset that the business has. Everything they do today is built on the data they have. So that has become strategic in terms of protecting the data. And what used to be, as you said, a storage admin or a backup admin in the CIO's organization, this has now bubbled up both at the CIO level, but also to the CISO, who is a heavy influencer, or sometimes even, we have even seen cases in large organizations where CIO and CISO roles have been merged, because they believe that if the CIO is managing the data, that's the most critical asset. The security aspect is very important as well. So now we are actually having conversations much higher in the management chain about how this is a strategic solution for their needs, and how this gives them peace of mind that they have protection against cyber attacks.
I think there's no shortage of data protection solution options out there. And I sometimes joke that this is the category that refuses to consolidate, because we keep adding new players, but nobody seems to go away. What is your sense of are customers thinking about this in a way where they want to rationalize some of these motions? Because there are so many different applications that people are using, even within the same organization. So how do I bring some order to what is maybe a little bit of a chaotic process at the moment?
Yeah, so if you go back 10, 15 years, there were tons of applications within the data center that customers were worried about. Fast forward to now, it's not just data center. You have cloud. You have a bunch of organizations that are in the process of transitioning from data center to the cloud, but it's still many large organizations are 80% of the data center, 20% of the cloud, right? So it's a hybrid world that they live in. And to add to the mix, now we have SaaS applications that are coming in. So each SaaS application is provided by a different vendor. But from an overall data perspective, the organization is still responsible for all the data they have. It doesn't matter whether they're using Salesforce for the customer data, or some other SaaS application for their purchase orders and things like that. All this data is sensitive information that they have to worry about. So the complexity has only increased. I think the reason we are seeing a lot of success, and we have about in our 10 years, we have more than 5,000 customers who are using Rubrik today across enterprise, cloud, and SaaS. I think the reason that they go with us is that we offer a single platform that can provide these services across enterprise applications, cloud applications, and SaaS applications. We provide it through our Rubrik Security Cloud, and this is actually a transition we made as our customers made this transition to the cloud. We took our product and we also delivered it through the cloud. So now they have a single portal that they log into, and they can see all their applications across, whether it's data center applications, cloud applications, SaaS applications, and they can apply the same kind of policies. They can use the same kind of security applications we provide across all of these. So consolidating all of this into a single solution and a platform that actually has a capability to deliver the single solution is the reason we have had the success we've had so far. And this is still continuing. And we talk to larger and larger organizations, and we have customers in every vertical you can think of. We have customers in healthcare, in financials, in insurance, retail, you name it. Because all of them have this concern that what happens with a cyber attack and how do I protect myself in such a situation. And it's not enough to just protect your Oracle database in the data center. You've got to worry about your Office 365. You've got to worry about your cloud native applications running in AWS or Azure or GCP. So the problem has actually gotten even more complex, say, from 15 years ago.
Are we watching some sort of convergence of data protection and data management? Because I think historically we had data protection was kind of a task, but with ransomware, we're starting to realize that we need to protect the data, but has that forced everybody to kind of revisit their whole approach to data management, which sometimes is, shall we say, uneven at best?
Yeah, so I think what has happened is I think customers are slowly beginning to realize that when you think about security, traditionally you've thought about things like firewalls, you've thought about identity systems, malware detection, right? But most of these are operating as kind of almost like a perimeter outside organizations, preventing the bad guys from getting in. One of the realizations we have had through some of the research that our teams have done is that 80-90% of attacks actually happen through credential leakage. So this is actually somebody's laptop was lost, remote working and all of that. And now they're coming in through legitimate means. They're not breaking in through some vulnerability. They're actually logging into your organization. And once they get in, they're snooping around there. They're trying to find the crown jewels and attack that. So I think people are beginning to realize that there is infrastructure security, but then which stops 999 or 1,000 attacks. But then one attack that gets through can do severe damage to your data, and then that can actually be detrimental to the business. So, which is why now they're beginning to understand, and this is the message we are also, educating customers that there's infrastructure security, which is extremely important, but you also need something for data security, and that's kind of where we come in. And people are concerned about what is the cyber attack, and they delete all our data, or they encrypt all our data, or even worse, they exfiltrate our data, sensitive information, customer information that now they threaten to release on the web. And for that, you've got to take, it's not just actions that you take if there's an attack, there's also actions you need to take prior to the attack. You need to understand the scope of your sensitive data, who has access to it, why is somebody from engineering accessing HR information? Is this an attacker masquerading as that engineer? So these kinds of questions are becoming more commonplace. And so you have to look at data more holistically. And as you said, it's not just about protecting data, it's about managing the data, it's managing the access, it's monitoring the activity on the data so that you can catch cyber attacks before they actually do some damage. So it's both proactive actions you need to take before any attack happens, as well as if the attack has happened, recovery actions you need to take to bring your business back up.
We hear a lot about all things AI these days. Will we be applying AI to the whole data protection, data resiliency motion, and what might that look like?
We have actually been using some form of AI in our products since, I would say, 2017, 2018. We actually released one of our first security products we released was really around anomaly detection. We track data changes over time, and we capture the data, all the enterprise data of our customers. And we can actually introduce a product that uses machine learning to understand anomalous changes in data. So suddenly, if your change rate is 0.5%, it suddenly jumps to 10%. It's probably an attacker who's probably gone and encrypted some data as part of a cyber attack. So we actually introduced this product, and the reason we were able to do it is that because number one, we built this platform with a single stack of software that understands not just the data, but also captures the metadata about the application. So when we protect a VM, it's not just a VM we're protecting. We know that it's a Windows VM that runs Active Directory. If you protect a VM in the cloud, we know, that's actually running a SQL Server database inside a Windows VM in the cloud. So because of that, because we understand the metadata about the application, we are actually able to we built a AI-based data threat engine on top that can actually use machine learning models to determine an anomalous attack and warn the customer. So that was the first security product we built in. After that, we have built a whole bunch of products that leverage the same AI-based data threat engine to detect sensitive information, detect malware that might have come into various applications. So we've been doing this for a while now. Obviously, with the introduction of generative AI, we actually recently announced what we call a generative AI assistant for our customers called Ruby. Because one of the challenges that we are seeing with customers is that there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of complexity in terms of data. And customers themselves, when there's anything that happens, they're struggling to figure out what is the action they should take. So what we have introduced is basically think of it as an assistant or a co-pilot that assists you. Oh, hey, I found this malware in your in your application. I immediately question the customer come to a chat and say, okay, what is this malware? Tell me more about it. And we'll answer the question and say, okay, what action should I take? And we'll actually come up with a recommendation. They'll say, is this malware present in other applications? And say, hey, these are all the applications we found. So what that does is that it makes it very easy in a conversational way for our customers to take action when they see something that's off. And this is obviously, we introduced the product recently, and we are going to add more and more skills to this as we build more security products. All of these will have a companion that can guide you through how to resolve any issues you see.
After 10 years of watching customers, what do you see them doing that just makes you shake your head sometimes and say, folks, we need to be better than this?
I mean, the one thing I've built in these last 10 years is a lot of empathy for the customer, because I see the complexity that they're dealing with. Whether it's IT organizations, security organizations, they are not getting tons of new headcount, but they're asked to do more and more. So what's happening is there is a lot of, they're just trying to keep their head above water. And so stuff gets dropped by the wayside. It's easy to point and say, hey, you should have done this. But then the problem is they're dealing with thousands of such issues every day. And they're often drowning in alerts that are coming from various security systems. So I think the approach we are trying to do is simplify this whole thing. Can we make it extremely simple where we bubble up the most important issues to our customers so that then they can take the actions? Usually if you can do that effectively, if you can kind of eliminate the noise from the actual issues that they need to focus on, people will take actions. And people want to take those actions. They want to protect their organizations. So I think it's more about, we can talk about best practices and you should do this and you should do that. But I think we also have to make it easy for our customers to be able to deal with the thousands of things that get thrown at them every day. And the complexity only keeps increasing. There's nothing that decreases. So I feel that obviously there's a lot of room for improvement, but I think the tools also have to step up to be able to help the customers. And our goal is, how can you keep innovating to make it give peace of mind to our customers that they're taking care of their most important assets.
So what is your best advice then, given those issues? If I am in charge of this, or I'm part of the team that's in charge of this, or I'm the CISO or the CTO, sometimes, you hear people say, if everybody's in charge of something, nobody's in charge of something. So how do I kind of bring it all together?
It's a great point. I think it's extremely important that there is somebody who's accountable for the data, because I think you go wake somebody from their sleep that says, what's the most important asset you have in the organization? That's its data, right? But I think not that many organizations have somebody who's accountable for, to ensure that the data is protected. It often rolls into different organizations. It depends on the organization. So I think it's important to have focus saying, hey, if there is any kind of a cyber attack, is my data protected? Can I make sure that I'm doing everything in my power to prevent data exfiltration? So these are high-level questions that the organization has to be able to ask, and usually have somebody who's accountable for this and then can actually go focus on this and solve this. I think then it lets them step back, take a picture of how the data is laid out in the organization. What are the most critical assets that they need to secure? Make sure that those are secured first, and then keep going through this process. It's a long process. It's not something you can solve overnight. It requires focus. It requires patience. It requires dedicated focus for a long time to go solve this. And obviously, there are new organizations that come into you can through acquisition and other means can come into your organization. Now you need to go and solve it for those organizations. So having a process which is repeatable is very important. The other important thing that again we have learned over the last 10 years is that it's very important when an attack has happened. It's probably the most stressful day in your life. You want to be prepared. So the more you can actually go through some dry runs and have simulation activities to understand what you would do, how would you, if there's an attack, what are the steps you would take, including whom would you inform about this and what is the process. A lot of this is something that organizations don't have the time to go and figure this out, but doing that kind of exercise, I think, will have them much better prepared when they have to take action. It's not easy, but I think with some preparation, I think we can rest easy that we are better prepared for any such eventuality.
All right, folks. Well, you heard it here. We've come a long way in the last decade for sure, but there's still no substitute for doing the actual work. Hey, Nitro, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you again for the opportunity. It's great talking to you.
And back to you guys in the studio.
Discover the cutting-edge insights of our new show, AI Times, a series that explores the limitless potential of artificial intelligence. Sponsored by the AI Infrastructure Alliance, the AI Times is at the forefront of the AI revolution, tackling the crucial questions of how we can leverage AI for the betterment of humanity. Stay ahead of the curve as this show delves into all things surrounding AI, including trends, pressing concerns, and the positive impact AI is making around the globe. AI Times.
Okay, that's going to call a wrap on Techstrong TV today. I hope you enjoyed today's show. It was very cyber heavy, but we're all concerned with cyber. We'll be back Thursday with more fresh content as well as a new Techstrong Gang episode. Don't miss that. Until then, this is Alan Schemmel. Be well, be safe, be strong, Techstrong.